All right, so let's talk about the Philadelphia experiment. I think it happened. I think it was real. More importantly, it lets you know exactly where we were, what our capabilities were, and what our mindsets were all the way back in the early 40s. And I'll try to explain as best as I can. So, before we can talk about the experiment, we just have to talk about the mindsets in general, right? Because that's how we got here, how they were thinking. First and foremost, Germany, they was taking over the world. We needed to figure out what to do. So we was trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B safely with our ships. Navy was very concerned about this. And they also felt it was important because, again, Germany was doing what they were doing. So they come up with a plan of, or an idea of invisibility. Now, mind you, we're talking about invisibility. So for them to actively come up with this idea enough to formulate a plan means that the technology was there, which means we're a lot farther along than we ever thought we were. For that to even come up, we have to understand our mind state. So they speak with this man at the time, world's smartest man, one of the smartest people ever in history. Our entire science database is built off of his thought process. So he has an idea. He's working on invisibility. He has an idea. He says, he says, I have a unified field theory idea, and what it will do, it will get you from point A to point B safely. Now, I must tell you that the idea of his theory is to tie all fundamental forces of nature together. This is his idea. This is basically what it is: to tie all fundamental forces of nature together. I think this is going to be very important for something that I'll say later, because I do think that they were successful in this. So at this point, now comes in the USS Eldridge. This is the ship in question. This is the ship that the ship and its crew, where all of the mystery is revolving around. This is the ship that, upon loading up this device that was to help them become invisible, was put on this ship, and it was witnessed by a Navyman named Carl Allen. And he was on the SS Andrew Furuseth, I believe it is called. He was accompanying the USS Eldridge. So they flipped the device. The device works. The ship does disappear. So to them, the ship is invisible, but it is still there. And again, this is eyewitness accounts. So the ship disappears when the switch is flipped. However, in reality, what happens is it wasn't invisibility that they did. They literally created a portal. So with this portal now open, the ship is now in Norfolk, Virginia. Still a naval base, but it is now in Virginia. Stays there for a couple of minutes, and it comes back. Now this is Carl Allen. As you can see, he is a real person. This is his accounts. This is his testimony. You don't have to believe him if you don't want to. So the ship is now back. The crew is now back. However, things are, I guess amiss is the word that you can use. Soldiers are dead. Crew is dead. They are fused, some of them, with the ship. And this is where I think the success of Einstein's theory comes into play, because he wanted to tie all fundamental forces of nature together. Now, his idea versus the reality obviously were two different things, but his theory, they were all on the right path. But unfortunately, because number one, we're in war, so any experiments that they would have normally have done for something like this wouldn't have been rushed along in the way that it was. And it was rushed along. Like, you and I both know that that's just we were in war, we were desperate. We were in war, we were desperate, we were rushing. So all normal procedures when it comes to experiments like this just wouldn't have happened. So this was an unforeseen circumstance. However, the crew at that particular point in time, some of them were what were described as suffering from side effects of insanity, intangibility, and some were frozen in place. So what the Navy at that particular point in time decided to do was transfer them to a psychiatric facility where the survivors of this incident were what they were described as brainwashed, to obviously be forced to forget these events, because this is about as top secret as it could possibly get. This is about as world breaking as it could possibly be, and it was far above anything that they ever imagined, period, hands down. So as a result, they didn't kill them, which thank goodness they didn't, but again, the thought is that they were brainwashed to forget. So lo and behold, these events happen. Carl witnesses it. He's quiet at this particular point for about 12 years, when a UFOologist is writing books. And his name, let me see where his name is. His name is Morris K Jessup. Now, Morris K Jessup wrote books. He was very vocal about UFOs. He was very vocal about his ideas. And he had sources, and people were concerned because of the path that he was on. He was on one of those correct paths when it comes to all of this enlightenment with UFOs. Now, this is way back in the 50s, so it's hard to talk about these things today and not be considered crazy. So imagine what he went through back in the 50s, right? So Mr. Allen decided to send Mr. Jessup all sorts of documents concerning UFOs of all sorts, from technology to aliens, and of course the Philadelphia experiment. So Jessup reaches out, they began talking, and before you know it, this is Mr. Jessup, and before you know it, Mr. Jessup commits suicide after, following up on leads and other things. He is found dead from suicide. I'll leave that up to you on what you believe about that. But if you know the pattern of truth, and when it comes to super secrets, people die. So that's just one more thing that I think leads to this being true. So then let's fast forward 30 years. The movie comes out, Philadelphia Experiment, obviously based on the facts of all of this stuff here. And a gentleman by the name of, do I have his whole name? I do. Alfred Bielek, I want to say. Lo and behold, he watches this movie, and all of a sudden, all of these thoughts start rushing back to him. Lo and behold, he is one of the brainwashed, quote unquote, soldiers that was actually on the USS Eldridge. So now he now has his memory reanimated, and he starts talking. And he talked until his death. He wasn't killed, he wasn't murdered. He talked and spoke about this until his death. And some of the things that he said was not only that day was a portal created, but beings, as in UFOs, actually came out of it. And the Navy even managed to capture one of them. What truth there is to this, who knows? But all of these things together, when you put them all together, you look at how desperate we were back in the day during these war times. When you look at the fact that we were having these conversations, which means obviously it was an option. When you throw in the world's smartest man, maybe one of the smartest people to ever live, when you throw in the fact that there was a suicide, when you throw in the fact that somebody came out the blue 30 years later and said, yes, I was one of those people, when you put them all together, we have the Philadelphia experiment. Let me know what you think. As usual,